James, thought I had a happy family, but I didn't know it was all just an illusion. The CEO's wife, Sophia, was suspicious of me and my father-in-law, fearing that we would covet her property. We had to report any expenses at home that exceeded $10 to her. The turn of fate came unexpectedly. My son was seriously ill and needed $3,000 for surgery. I applied to Sophia anxiously, but she only laughed at me and refused. "You are really unscrupulous in order to get money. Wait until you send me your son's death notice, and then we can talk." At that moment, my world seemed to fall into endless darkness. Seeing this, my father-in-law ran to the company to ask her for money in a rage, and even threatened to commit suicide, and finally got a black card. However, on the way back, my father-in-law was accidentally involved in a car accident and was knocked more than 10 meters away. When I rushed to the hospital, my father-in-law was dying. He handed me the black card with a trembling voice. "Hurry up, pay the money for Mark's treatment, you must save him." After saying this, my father-in-law closed his eyes forever. I suppressed my grief and hurriedly took out my card to pay for my son Mark's surgery, but when I got to the counter, I found that there was not a penny in the card. Before I could recover from this despair, Sophia called me. "It seems that I have spoiled you too much. Now you are teaming up with my father to lie and force me to pay." Fortunately, I had foresight and prepared a few empty cards with no credit limit in advance. As a lesson, from now on, your living expenses will be reduced by half, and all activities of my son will be cancelled. The son eventually died in the hospital because he had no money to treat his illness and missed the opportunity for treatment. When I was handling the funeral for my father-in-law and son, I saw the updates posted by Sophia's secretary David. The photos showed a luxury villa worth $500 million and the high-end dresses worth tens of millions that the father and son wore. The accompanying text was to thank the boss for the luxurious gift and such a big birthday surprise for me and my father. I felt mixed emotions and left a comment. "Congratulations, you are a happy family of 3, and you will be a family from now on." Inside the funeral home, the mixed smell of incense and disinfectant was so oppressive that it made one breathless. The staff slowly approached and handed me 2 sandalwood boxes, with a look of pity in his eyes. "My condolences." The wooden box was very light, so light that it seemed as if it contained not the whole of my son and father-in-law, but a wisp of smoke that was about to dissipate. As soon as I picked it up, my cell phone suddenly rang. It was Sophia's phone. I pressed the answer button with shaking hands. Before I could say anything, I heard her roaring angrily, "James, are you crazy? What nonsense are you talking about under David's status? David has been feeling guilty because of your comment. He has an excellent performance at work, and the company cares about excellent employees. What's wrong with me giving him a gift and spending his father's birthday with him? You apologize to him immediately, otherwise, you won't get a penny for the medical examination fee and living expenses next month." I thought my tears had dried long ago, but after hearing these words, my eyes couldn't help but become sore again. Sophia, who is obviously a billionaire CEO with 3 listed companies, is so stingy with her family. My son has been in poor health since he was born and often goes to the hospital. I asked her many times for more money to supplement his nutrition, but every time I got her aggressive and disgusted scolding. In the huge mansion, she was reluctant to hire a servant, so she asked me and my father-in-law to clean every day. My father-in-law worked hard to raise her, but he couldn't enjoy any of the blessings of a daughter. He wore the same clothes for more than 10 years and had no money to buy new ones, so he always ate hamburgers and pizza with us. Over the years, my father-in-law's health has been getting worse and worse. The annual medical examination fee for the whole family is my last bottom line. Now, in order to please her secretary, she even uses this last bottom line to threaten me. When I think of my son's serious illness, I desperately begged her to take out $3,000 for my son's surgery, but was ruthlessly rejected. As a last resort, my father-in-law dragged his old body to her company and threatened her with his life to get the money. Perhaps he ran too fast, and unfortunately got into a car accident when he came back. He held on to his last breath and finally waited for me to show up and put the bank card in my hand. My father-in-law didn't know until he died that there was not a penny in the card he got with his life, and his grandson couldn't be saved. Before my son died, he kept asking me over and over again, "Dad, why didn't Mom come? Is it because I was not good and she doesn't want me anymore?" Until he closed his eyes completely, my son didn't wait for his mother to visit him. Both my father-in-law and his son left the world with regrets. Looking at the 2 urns in my arms, I could no longer suppress the anger in my heart. Apologize? It's impossible in this life. You killed both your son and father-in-law, are you satisfied? Keep those expenses for yourself to burn in the underworld. Sophia, you will not die a good death. After saying that, I pressed the hang-up button fiercely to cut off the roar on the other end of the phone. After leaving the funeral home, I was exhausted both physically and mentally. I hailed a taxi on the side of the road and lay down in the car to rest. The bright light reflected from the posters on the street lingered in the corners of my eyes. I turned my head to look out the window, and everywhere I looked were pictures of David and his son. The driver saw that I was staring at the posters outside the window, so he talked to me and explained, "Young man, don't you know? All the billboards in the city tonight are this father and son. Did you see that young man? He is the secretary of the president of the Sophia family group. All of this was done by Ms. Sophia. Today is the secretary's father's birthday, and all of this is to make the secretary happy." I finally understood that Sophia did all this to celebrate the birthday of her secretary's father. She had never celebrated birthdays for our real family members. She had completely forgotten the birthdays of her own father and son, but she remembered other people's fathers' birthdays clearly and celebrated them lavishly. It was really ridiculous. Seeing my dazed look, the driver continued to talk to himself. "The news is now on the hot search, and the discussion on the internet is heated. Everyone says that Ms. Sophia is a husband-loving demon." I opened my phone with trembling hands, and the first hot search showed the title: "The president of Sophia Family Group spent a huge amount of money to hold a luxurious birthday party for the future father-in-law." Clicking on the link, the comment area was full of blessings and envy. "Ms. Sophia hasn't gotten married yet, but she's already trying to please her father-in-law. David's father is so lucky, and he will enjoy the good days in the future. Ms. Sophia is beautiful and rich, and she is so considerate to her boyfriend. David is so lucky, I envy him." The harsh comments hurt me. The driver's voice came again. "I heard that Ms. Sophia started preparing for the citywide feast a long time in advance. There will be a few hours of drone fireworks show in the city center tonight, which cost over 100 million yuan, just to make her boyfriend smile. Rich people are really different. They are so generous to celebrate their future father-in-law's birthday. It's really a fairy tale love." The driver was still nagging and praising their love, but I didn't want to listen anymore. After all these years of marriage, she has always kept our relationship hidden from others. She never mentioned me and my son. She even despised her father for his humble origins and never wanted to acknowledge the existence of her biological father. All of us are like stains in her life, and cannot be seen in the light. Her preference for her secretary is well known to everyone. She even tried hard to please other people's fathers in order to please him. What is the value of all the efforts and the kindness of my father-in-law in raising me over the years? Outside the car window, the smiling faces of David and his son were still playing on a loop on the huge LED screen. My pale face was reflected on the car window glass, which was out of tune with the hustle and bustle outside. I met Sophia because of my father-in-law. The year I graduated from college, I came to this strange city alone to work hard. But as soon as I left the train station, my wallet was unfortunately stolen. I sold all my belongings and rented a house for a few $100s. But for a month in a row, I was repeatedly rejected in job hunting, and all the money I sold was spent. Life once pushed me to despair. Because I couldn't pay the rent, I was kicked out by the landlord. My parents died early, and I had no family to help me, so I could only sleep under the bridge with my luggage. Later, I had a high fever and had no money to buy medicine. On the way out to find a job, I unfortunately fell on the street. It was my father-in-law who rescued me and brought me home when he was picking up garbage. He bought me medicine to treat my illness and made a bed for me in the small room, which helped me get through the most embarrassing period. At that time, Sophia was a sophomore student with poor grades and she skipped classes every day to surf the internet. In order to repay my father-in-law, I offered to help Sophia with her homework and help her graduate successfully. After a few visits, we gradually became familiar with each other and had more and more common topics. On New Year's Day, she confessed her love to me, and I agreed and bent down to kiss her. When my father-in-law knew we were together, he smiled from ear to ear and tears welled up in the corners of his eyes. He held my hand and said, "Son, this will be your home from now on. Dad will treat you well for the rest of your life." At that moment, I felt that I had a family and found my true home. After graduation, Sophia chose to start her own business. I gave her all my savings from the past 2 years and resolutely quit my job to work with her. In 2 years, we struggled and supported each other, and finally saw the dawn. It was also in that year that I proposed to her. Soon after the marriage, we had a lovely son, and the family of 4 was happy. I thought this was what happiness looked like. So under her advice, I chose to return to my family and live a good life with this home. However, within 2 years of our happy life, a change quietly occurred. As our career became more and more successful, Sophia also became more and more concerned about her reputation. She began to despise my father-in-law and me for our humble backgrounds and our lack of temperament and conversation. At the company's anniversary celebration, my father-in-law and I were originally invited to attend the banquet, but all the guests were talking about us and speculating about our identities. Sophia's first reaction was not to speak for us, but to think that we were not presentable and embarrassed her. So, after we revealed our identities, she denied it on the spot and had us kicked out of the banquet hall with a sullen face. Since then, my father-in-law, my son and I have been banned from mentioning her outside. Sophia has never admitted to the outside world that she is married and has children. In order to bury her tragic past, she even claimed that her parents died young and that she was an elite who returned from studying abroad. Later, Sophia hired a young and handsome secretary, David. David not only helped Sophia take care of everything at work, but also often accompanied her to various social occasions, and handled everything with ease. When David came to my house for the first time, he lost the expensive watch he had just bought and appeared in his father-in-law's room the next day. Sophia was determined that we were dirty thieves with a street-like demeanor. So from then on, Sophia was worried that we coveted her property, so she began to cut our living expenses and let us continue to live a hard life. Under David's instigation, she kept restricting our expenses and reduced our living expenses again and again. In the end, even expenses exceeding $10 had to be reported to her. She was even reluctant to give her son the $3,000 for life-saving surgery. The gifts given to David and his son at this birthday party were worth hundreds of millions, but she didn't even blink. The life of the person closest to her was not as important as David's smile. It was really absurd. This marriage should have ended long ago. I turned on my phone, contacted a divorce lawyer, and asked him to draft a divorce agreement. I returned to my familiar home, but it was already empty. After putting down the urns of my father-in-law and son, I looked at the family photo of four in the living room and wiped the tears from my eyes. "Dad, Mark, I will take you away from this house. We will never come back here again." After packing up the belongings of my father-in-law and son, I was about to separate from Sophia. At this time, David walked into the house with Sophia in his arms. Next to him stood a middle-aged man in a suit and tie, David's father. He was holding countless luxury gifts in both hands. My heart ached dully, as if being pierced by countless fine needles. After so many years of marriage, Sophia had never bought a decent gift for her father-in-law, not even a pair of the most ordinary shoes. Now, she is so generous and caring to David's father. She is really a good daughter-in-law of David's family. Seeing me, Sophia subconsciously broke away from David's arms and tried to keep a distance from him. Watching her actions, I just felt ridiculous. She had made it known to everyone in the city today in order to please David's father, and now she was afraid that I would see it. David's face flashed with displeasure, but he didn't dare to say anything. Sophia stared at the two suitcases behind me, frowned and said unhappily, "Can you please stop being unreasonable? I'm going to run away from home after hearing a few words from you. What will happen to Dad and his son if you leave?" When she mentioned her father-in-law and Mark, my heart choked and grief spread endlessly in my chest. I raised my head, but didn't answer. I just looked at her and asked, "Sophia, do you know what day it is today?" Sophia was stunned for a moment, obviously not expecting my question. In doubt, I began to ask myself, "Today is the birthday of my son and father. But you completely forgot that you spent a lot of effort to hold a birthday party for an outsider and let the whole world know about it, but you are indifferent to your own father and son." Hearing this, Sophia's impatient attitude eased a little, and a guilty look flashed in her eyes, but she quickly regained her composure. "They celebrate birthdays every year, so this one doesn't matter. At most, I can make it up to them in a couple of days." Then she glanced around and frowned and asked, "Where are Dad and Mark? Where did they go? Why aren't they at home? Are you angry just because I forgot their birthdays? Dad is really something. He's so old, but he's still jealous like a child. And son, you've led him astray, and now he has such a bad temper." My father-in-law and son had to endure her groundless accusations even after they died. Looking at the woman in front of me, I finally gave up on her and said calmly, "Sophia, let's get a divorce. I'll give it to you in 2 days, and you can just sign it then." I glanced at David and his son beside her and continued, "So that you and your family of 3 can be together, and you don't have to suffer anymore in the future." Hearing this, David and his son's eyes burst into ecstasy, and they couldn't even hide the joy on their faces. Sophia was stunned for a moment, her face suddenly changed, and she grabbed my arm and said angrily, "James, are you crazy? Do you know what you are talking about? Just because I don't give you money, you want to threaten me with divorce. Even if you don't want to live with me, are you willing to leave your father and son?" When I heard Sophia mention her father-in-law and Mark again, I was overwhelmed with grief. If she hadn't refused to pay for her son's surgery, how could he have died? If her father-in-law hadn't run out to ask for money, how could he have had a car accident? I shook her hand off and shouted, "Don't use Dad and son as an excuse. You are the one who has no right to mention them. Dad and Mark have been killed by you. Sophia, you killed 2 lives, you will definitely go to hell." Pa! A slap landed hard on my face, and the burning pain spread instantly. I staggered and held onto the suitcase in my hand, barely able to stabilize my body. A fishy sweet taste filled my mouth. Sophia was also stunned after the fight, her hands frozen in midair. She stammered for a long time, and just when she was about to come forward to check on me, David grabbed her arm, his tone full of gloating. "Mr. James, don't blame Ms. Sophia for being angry, who told you to curse your father-in-law and son to death for no reason. This is too vicious." David's father saw his son speak and added fuel to the fire. He cursed his father-in-law and son to death. If I had such a vicious son-in-law, I would never rest in peace until my death. Sophia came back to her senses and snorted coldly as if she had finally found the stairs. Seeing the family photo in my hand, David suddenly smiled knowingly and said jokingly, "I understand. You know that Ms. Sophia loves her son the most and is the most filial. You deliberately took the 2 of them to hide outside, preparing to use a sad drama to force her to bow her head." After hearing what David said, Sophia was furious and said, "Dad and son have really learned bad things from you. Hurry up and bring them back. I don't have the energy to deal with you guys." I squeezed my eyes shut and said in agony, "Dad and Mark will never come back." After hearing what I said, Sophia was furious. She snatched the suitcase from my hand and said in a cold voice, "Since you insist on taking them away from home, don't even think about taking a penny from home. I want to check these 2 suitcases." I was shocked by Sophia's shamelessness and responded angrily, "You are so strict about our spending, how can I take the money from home? This is just my personal belongings." Seeing my emotional fluctuations and my refusal to check, Sophia became more and more certain that there was something inside. She looked at me sarcastically and said, "You don't have any money at home, but every piece of stuff in your home is worth tens of millions. How do I know you didn't secretly sell off the furniture at home? If you are really honest, why don't you dare let me check it?" David and his son also echoed my words, and were sure that there was something precious in my suitcase. Seeing that she was determined not to let me leave until she saw the treasure, I finally compromised and opened the password box. The first safe was opened and it contained my daily necessities, as well as my son and father-in-law's belongings. It was ridiculous that all the belongings of 3 people could only fill 1 suitcase. When Sophia saw the things, she said with certainty in her eyes, "Sure enough, you took my father and son away from home to force me to compromise. James, you are really unscrupulous." As she said that, she squatted down, checked one by one, and took out her son's peace locket and her father-in-law's favorite Buddhist string. "David, didn't you say you wanted a blessed peace locket as a pendant? This one is blessed, I'll give it to you. Uncle, didn't you say you wanted a Buddhist string? This one is also blessed, I'll give it to you." The 2 of them happily took it and thanked him. I wanted to snatch the things back from them. This is the peace locket Mark was born with, the most important thing to him. This Buddhist string is the only relic of my father-in-law. But Sophia held me back and didn't let me touch them. She was anxiously protecting David and his son, but she didn't notice how hard she held me. My forearm immediately turned red. She didn't let go until I cried out in pain. But the next second, a crisp sound was heard, the sound of the peace locket breaking. Then, the sound of the Buddha beads scattering all over the ground. The string was broken. David smiled triumphantly, but pretended to be innocent and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. James. My dad and I were too careless. Both of them are broken." Seeing the provocation in their eyes, I could no longer control my anger. I rushed over and started fighting with them, shouting, "You 2 beasts, I'm going to kill you." I wanted to take further action, but was stopped by Sophia. She said in a harsh tone, "Are you crazy enough? Why are you so angry about these 2 bastards? If you keep acting like this, don't blame me for being rude to you." Sophia pushed me away and kicked over another open suitcase in anger. 2 urns rolled out of the suitcase and broke into pieces, with the ashes mixed and scattered all over the floor. She wanted to continue expressing herself, but when she saw the ashes all over the floor, she froze in her tracks. Her breath was choked, her expression was panicked, and she asked in a trembling voice, What is that?" Well-informed David's father walked over, kicked it twice, and sneered, "It's just ashes from the stove." David curled his lips and sneered, but pretended to be pretentious and said, "Mr. James, you really put a lot of effort into it. In order to make it look realistic, you even used fake ashes." Hearing this, Sophia's inner uneasiness and fear gradually dissipated, and then she said with disgust, "This is crazy. In order to make me compromise, you even used the ashes trick." She took David's arm, turned her head and glared at me with a gloomy face. "I don't care whether you are mentally ill or acting, you were so unscrupulous for money. I don't have time to accompany you. Hurry up and bring dad and son back, otherwise you can forget about living expenses this month. Since you dislike them so much, I will take them away now. During this time, you guys should reflect on yourselves at home." After that, Sophia took David and his son and turned away without looking back. Years of compromise and tolerance made Sophia stubbornly believe that I couldn't live without her and that I was just throwing a tantrum. She just needed to deal with it calmly as usual, and the matter would pass as if nothing had happened. I watched them leave, and my vision went dark and my heart ached. Before I lost consciousness, I used up my last bit of strength to call the emergency number. I woke up again in the hospital, the smell of disinfectant filling my nose. It was the emergency personnel who found me unconscious based on the address. After I was discharged from the hospital, the lawyer told me that the divorce agreement had been prepared. I sent Sophia numerous messages asking her to sign, but all fell on deaf ears. I called her again, only to receive her angry scolding and a busy tone. In desperation, I had to take the divorce agreement prepared by my lawyer and go to the company to find her. This was my first time stepping into this place in so many years, but I was told by the front desk that I could not enter without an appointment downstairs of the company. "I'm Sophia's husband, your president's husband." The receptionist's smile froze, and then she looked me up and down, with a flash of contempt in her eyes. "Sir, our Miss Sophia is single. If you want to get in bed, you should find a better reason. I've seen a lot of men like you, don't be so shameless, and leave now." Several employees around us heard our conversation and laughed. "Who is this man? How dare he pretend to be our CEO's husband? He must be another money-crazy guy." Just as he was about to ask the front desk to help him make a phone call, a man in a suit and tie, with an imposing manner, strode over with great momentum. It was David's good friend Robert, who was also a senior executive of the company. He walked up to me, without saying a word, grabbed my arm, and dragged me out. I had just been discharged from the hospital, and I was weak and had no power to resist. He just dragged me out of the building, and I stumbled and fell to the ground. "You dare to mess with David? Are you tired of living? He is the future husband of the president of Sophia Family Group. Someone like you is not even worthy of carrying David's shoes. I will teach you a lesson for him today." I struggled to stand up and defended myself. "I am the president's husband. David is just a gigolo who interferes with other people's families." But he only laughed at me more crazily. "You are worthy of being the president's husband? You are still dreaming." He had laughed enough, his face darkened, and he turned his head and winked at the security guard behind him. Several burly security guards immediately surrounded me and approached me with ill intentions. Fear filled my heart. I trembled as I took out my phone from my bag and pulled out my marriage certificate and wedding photos. "I really am Sophia's husband. If she knew you guys treated me like this, she would never let you go." But they didn't even look at it. Their phones were snatched away and thrown to the ground. "Not only do you have delusions, but you're also arrogant. It seems that if I don't teach you a lesson, you won't know how high the sky is or how deep the earth is." As he said that, he waved his hand back, and everyone rushed forward, punching and kicking like raindrops. The intense pain made my eyes go black, and I curled up on the ground, and soon I was powerless to fight back. I was beaten to a bloody mess and was dying. Robert didn't intend to let me go. Instead, he grabbed my hair and lifted my head up. Then he took out a folding knife from his pocket and pointed it at my face. "You are a pretty boy who relies on your face to destroy other people's feelings. Now, I've destroyed your face. Let's see how you can seduce other people's girlfriends." My heart was beating like a drum, but I still mustered up the courage to say, "I am your CEO's husband. If your CEO knew, he would never let you go." Robert sneered, a hint of resentment flashed in his eyes. "Really? Then let's see what punishment I will get if I destroy you." As he said that, he slashed the folding knife towards my face, cutting it again and again. The sharp knife cut across my cheek, and the burning pain almost suffocated me. Blood dripped along the dagger and meandered down my neck. My vision gradually blurred and my consciousness began to fade. As I was dying, I suddenly heard someone yelling frantically, "CEO! The CEO is coming!" As I was losing consciousness, I saw a familiar figure running towards me in a panic. Like a drowning person clinging to a life-saving straw, I used all my strength to pull at her trouser leg. "Sophia, tell him that I am really your husband." The executives and the security guards froze in an instant. The men who had been ferocious just now turned pale. They obviously didn't expect that I actually knew Sophia. With just one word from Sophia, my identity would be proven, and no one would attack me again. I saw Sophia slowly squat down in my expectant eyes. I struggled to raise my hands, thinking that she was going to help me up and take me away. However, she just leaned close to my ear and said in a cold tone, "James, don't think you can fool me by playing this trick. Put away your clumsy tricks." I felt like I was falling into an icy cave. I looked at her in disbelief. The blood in my body seemed to freeze and despair spread throughout my body. Sophia stood up and announced to everyone, "This man on the ground has nothing to do with me." The security guards who were still fearful just now immediately regained their previous arrogance. "Did you hear that? Miss Sophia doesn't know you, a lunatic. You dare to pretend to be the president's husband. You are really tired of living. Today I will teach you a lesson and let you know who you can't afford to offend." They no longer had any scruples, and their attacks were more brutal and vicious than before. Severe pain instantly swept through my body. I curled up and tried to protect my head, but it was no use. There was a sharp pain in my ribs, and my internal organs were displaced. I felt my consciousness becoming increasingly blurred, and a mouthful of blood spurted out, and the smell of blood stimulated my nerves. I used up my last bit of strength, raised my head, and screamed at Sophia at the top of my lungs, "Sophia, you allowed your adulterer to hurt your husband, and killed your son and father. You are so vicious and heartless that you will not die a good death." After saying that, another large mouthful of blood gushed out, and my eyes went black. I could no longer hold on, and I fell to the ground and completely lost consciousness. The blood stained the ground beneath me, shocking to the eyes. The people around me were frightened by my miserable state and stopped what they were doing. "Dead, dead. Run!" Someone screamed in terror, and everyone ran away. In a blink of an eye, the originally crowded place became empty, leaving only Sophia, standing beside me with a sullen face. Sophia lowered her head and kicked my bloody arm with her toes. She said impatiently, "Stop pretending. Everyone has left. The show should be over. Hurry up and get up. Don't embarrass yourself here." However, I still kept my eyes closed and did not move. Sophia finally realized that something was wrong. The impatience on her face gradually faded, replaced by a trace of panic. She suddenly squatted down, tremblingly stretched out her hand to feel my breath, and the blood on her face instantly disappeared. Then she hurriedly called for someone to lift me up, and stumbled towards the hospital. The smell of disinfectant penetrated my nose, and I slowly opened my eyes, feeling waves of dull pain all over my body. Sophia was sitting beside the bed. When she saw me wake up, she immediately came closer with an unnatural apology on her face. "You're awake. Just now, I thought you were acting. I'm sorry." Since she became rich, Sophia has been unwilling to bow her head easily, let alone apologize, even if she is wrong. If it were before, I might have immediately said it was okay, but now, her apology is no longer necessary. I struggled to sit up, but the wound was pulled, and I gasped in pain. Sophia quickly came forward to support me and carefully put a pillow behind my back. "No need. I've brought the divorce agreement. Once you sign it, we'll have nothing to do with each other anymore." I pointed to the bag on the bedside table and motioned for her to take out the agreement. Sophia's expression, which had just relaxed, suddenly turned gloomy again. She stood up abruptly, with suppressed anger in her tone. "Have you had enough? You have been alone at home for so many years, without a job and no income. How do you support yourself and your children? Don't say such things again in the future." After a pause, she walked to the other side of the bed with her back to me, and her tone softened a little. "Where are Mark and Dad? Why haven't they come home yet? I'm not making a fuss." I took out the file bag from the bedside table, pulled out the divorce agreement, and handed it to her calmly. "My son and father-in-law are both dead, so please sign it. From now on, there is no need for me to stay." The voice was very soft, but it instantly ignited Sophia's anger. Sophia slammed the agreement in my hand to the ground and roared, "James, don't think I dare not hit you. For the sake of divorce, you actually cursed your father-in-law and son. It's so vicious. Since you are a patient now, I won't bother with you, but don't push it. I won't let my son live in a divorced family. Don't even think about divorce." After saying these words, Sophia turned and left. But I didn't want to tangle with her anymore, not even for a second, so I tore off the 4-needle in my hand and forced myself to chase her out. But when I reached the lobby, grabbed her arm, and my eyes accidentally swept across the LCD screen next to the elevator, I froze. The introduction of the hospital's investors was playing on the screen, and at the top, the 3 characters Sophia were written. My mind went blank and my body began to tremble uncontrollably. Sophia was actually the largest shareholder of this hospital. I raised my head suddenly, staring at Sophia, my voice trembling. "Is this your hospital? This is your hospital? Why? Why didn't you save your son? Why?" A fishy sweet taste welled up in my throat, but I couldn't stop my tears. It was such a joke that he died in his own hospital because he had no money for treatment. Sophia was stunned by my sudden questioning, and a flash of impatience flashed across her face. James, what are you crazy about? This is a public place, can you please stop making trouble? At this time, a doctor in a white coat passed by. She paused and seemed to recognize me. Hey, you are not. You are the father of the child that day. It's such a pity. Please accept my condolences for the matter of your father-in-law and son. Sophia's face turned pale, and she finally realized something was wrong. She grabbed the doctor's arm and said, "What are you talking about? Who died?" The doctor pointed at me and said in a heavy voice, "It was this gentleman's child and father-in-law." The child's condition was very serious at the time, and we tried our best to save him, but because we couldn't raise enough money to save his life, we missed the best time for treatment. I remember that the hospital helped this gentleman and his father-in-law call their family members, but they all hung up. In the end, we couldn't get through anymore. Sophia looked pale, stared at the doctor and asked, "What about the old man?" The doctor sighed regretfully. He said he was going to find a way to get the money, but ended up having a car accident. Alas! Impossible, this is impossible. Sophia grabbed the doctor's collar and lost control of her emotions. My son will not die, and my father will not die either. Tell me, what benefits did you receive from him? Why are you talking nonsense here? I raised my hand and slapped her hard. Her face was tilted to one side and she looked at me in disbelief. You don't believe it, right? Then go check the surveillance footage and see how I begged you on the phone when I was holding Mark at the door of the emergency room that day. See how Dad begged you to answer the phone. I screamed at the top of my lungs, my emotions completely broken down. I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. They burst out. The death certificates are in my bag, go and see for yourself. It was you who killed them with your own hands, you watched them die without helping. What were you doing at that time? You were buying a mansion for David's father to celebrate his birthday. It was you who killed them for money and for your face. What qualifications do you have to pretend to be innocent now? Just a little bit, they could all survive. I couldn't bear it any longer and sat on the ground crying. Impossible, this is impossible. Sophia's body shook, refusing to accept all this. She turned around and stumbled away. When the text message of the divorce agreement came in, Sophia thought it was just another unreasonable act by James and blocked the number. Later, when she ran into James downstairs of the company, she watched coldly and thought he was acting again, so she denied knowing him in public. It was not until James vomited blood and fell to the ground motionless that Sophia panicked, hurriedly called for someone to lift him up, and rushed all the way to the hospital. In the hospital, the doctor's words were like thunder, roaring in Sophia's ears. Both father and son were gone. How could this be possible? She staggered back, her eyes went dark, and she couldn't believe that all this was true. She rushed to the monitoring room like crazy, trembling and asking for the surveillance video. On the cold screen, a scene that made Sophia regret for the rest of her life was played. She saw James rushing into the hospital with Mark in his arms, wandering helplessly at the door of the emergency room. She saw James begging her on the phone, but was coldly rejected. Then the scene switched, and her father was pushed into the emergency room, covered in blood and dying. His father stuffed a bank card into James' hand, and with the last bit of his strength, he urged him to save Mark, then his hand fell weakly and he slowly closed his eyes. Off-screen, Sophia covered her chest in pain, having difficulty breathing. On-screen, the scene continued to play. James took the card and ran to the payment window crying. His already grief-stricken face completely lost its luster after learning that the balance was insufficient. After that, James called her number again and again, but no one answered. After finally getting through, before he could even start talking, he was hung up mercilessly. The hospital later helped to call, but it never went through again. The last scene was James standing blankly at the door of the ward, his eyes empty. 2 white sheets were covered on Mark and his father. James collapsed on the ground, crying heartbreakingly. The scene ended, and Sophia slumped down in a chair, covering her face with her hands, sobbing in pain from between her fingers. She suddenly remembered the phone call that she couldn't get through in the surveillance video, and remembered that during that period of time, David always looked through her phone intentionally or unintentionally. With shaking hands, she searched for the blocked text messages. On the screen, a dense network of messages came into view, all of which were James and his father asking for help. Sophia, Mark is seriously ill and needs money. Sophia, Mark is dying, please save him. Daughter, Dad is begging you, please answer the phone. Each message was like a sharp knife, stabbing into her heart. Sophia's stomach was churning, and she rushed to the bathroom and vomited. Once, her father raised her with great difficulty and gave everything for her. Once, James was gentle and considerate, and never left her even when she was in the most difficult time. Once, Mark called her mom in a baby voice, with admiration in his eyes, and never resented her until his death. But what about her? Because of David's instigation, she despised and hated them, which eventually led to this irreparable tragedy. Regret, self-blame, and despair flooded her like a tide, making her feel miserable. Sophia slapped her face fiercely, again and again, until her cheeks were red and swollen, and blood oozed from the corners of her mouth. Beast! Beast! I am the real beast. It was me who killed them, it was me. The heart-wrenching cry echoed in the empty bathroom, but it was too late. She destroyed her own home and the person who loved her the most with her own hands. After completing the discharge procedures and preparing to leave, I suddenly received a call from the police. Mr. James, we have new findings about your father-in-law's car accident. It was not an accident, but man-made. The voice on the other end of the phone, every word was like a heavy hammer, hitting me dizzy. Man-made? How is that possible? I staggered out of the hospital, hailed a taxi, and headed straight to the police station. Before I even entered the interrogation room, I heard David shouting, "Do you know who my girlfriend is? You'd better let me go immediately. Don't refuse to drink for a reward. My girlfriend can make you pay with just one word." At this time, Sophia also hurried over. Seeing her, David immediately changed his face, pretending to be pitiful, and said with grievance, "Miss Sophia, they wronged me, you quickly let me go." However, this time Sophia did not comfort him as usual, but just stood there silently with a pale face. I couldn't help it any longer and asked the police anxiously, "Comrade police, where is the murderer who killed my father-in-law?" David's face suddenly changed, and he hid behind Sophia. But the interrogation room was so small, where could he hide? The police pointed his finger past Sophia and pointed directly at David, saying, "After investigation, we have determined that it was Mr. David who hired someone to hit and kill your father-in-law." "Impossible, you are slandering me." David hid behind Sophia and shouted, "It must be James. He is jealous of me and deliberately fabricated evidence to frame me." He looked up at Sophia with red eyes. "Miss Sophia, that's your father." "I would never do such a thing. You must believe me. I am being wronged." The blood in my body seemed to freeze. I always thought that my father-in-law died because he left too hastily and had a car accident due to his poor health. I didn't expect that it was David who caused it. I was so angry that I rushed forward to hit him, but was stopped by Sophia. She said anxiously, "James, calm down. David would not do such a thing. Although he did some wrong things because of me, he would never hire someone to kill my father." Sophia opened her arms and held David tightly behind her. She turned to the police and asked, "Comrade police, is there something wrong?" Despite the overwhelming evidence, she still chose to believe David and defend him. She was so heartbroken that she could not breathe, and her eyes were blurred by tears. I slapped her hard and yelled, "Sophia, are you still human? You actually protected the man who killed your own father. You are worse than an animal. You. Blood was flowing from the corner of Sophia's mouth, but she still refused to move a step and used her body to protect David. At this time, the door of the interrogation room was pushed open, and two policemen escorted a man in. It was the driver hired by David who caused the accident. The man lowered his head, avoided his eyes, and did not dare to look at David. "Mr. David asked me to do it. He said he would give me a large sum of money after the task was completed. He also said that as long as the old man died, he could become the president's husband." That night, I hit the old man at that intersection according to the address Mr. David gave me. The driver's voice trembled as he revealed all of David's crimes. "You're talking nonsense. I didn't do it," David hysterically retorted, but after the police produced more evidence, he collapsed to the ground and admitted everything. He cried and begged Sophia for mercy. "Miss Sophia, I was wrong, I was really wrong, please forgive me, save me, I will never dare to do it again. I can't go to jail, I can't." Sophia's hand, which had been protecting him, dropped down dejectedly. Suddenly, the messages that David had deliberately intercepted flashed through her mind, including the news of her son's critical illness and her father's call for help. Only at this moment did she finally believe that David had deliberately killed her son and father. She had actually been protecting a man who wanted to kill her family. With bloodshot eyes, she grabbed David's shoulders, shook him hard, and screamed madly, "Why? I'm so good to you, why do you want to hurt my family? I want to marry you so much, Miss Sophia, please save me, I promise I will never dare to do it again. I can't go to jail, I can't." David shouted and was taken out of the interrogation room by the police. This time, Sophia didn't even look at him. After walking out of the police station, Sophia kept staggering behind me. She didn't come close to me until I turned around. She begged, "James, I know I was wrong. David did all this.
He intercepted the information. I really didn't know anything about it. Can you forgive me?
She tried to grab my hand, but I dodged it sideways. So? I stared at her coldly.
Can a simple "I don't know" erase all the damage?
Sophia, your indulgence and indifference are the root causes of all this. Even if David wasn't around, how have you ever treated us well over the years?
Don't follow me anymore. There's no possibility between us anymore.
She stood there in a daze, watching me turn and leave, the color on her face fading little by little. The next second, the person who always attached great importance to face, suddenly, without any warning, thumped, kneeled heavily on the ground on the street, hugged my legs, and begged, "James, I know I was wrong, I am sorry for you. I shouldn't ask for your forgiveness, but Dad kept saying before he left that he hoped we could be happy.
We can start over and have another child.
I swear, I will treat you well and will never let David go.
I really know I was wrong, please, give me another chance."
She spoke incoherently, tears streaming down her face, crying like a helpless child.
But I just felt sick. My father-in-law lost his wife at an early age and raised Sophia alone.
He always felt that he owed her and failed to give her a complete family. So even though Sophia was indifferent to him later, he never complained. He saw that Sophia was not nice to me and my son, and he felt the same way. He always tried his best to make up for it and treated us father and son twice as well, just hoping that our family would be harmonious. On his deathbed, he was still thinking about my son and Sophia, asking me not to hate her, hoping that our family would be well, and hoping that our family would be harmonious until his death. Such a good father-in-law, and my son were killed by this selfish woman.
How could she still have the nerve to mention my father-in-law?
I remembered how desperate I was when my son was dying and I begged for help but couldn't get in touch with Sophia. It was as if I saw my father-in-law covered in blood and dying. I suddenly raised my foot and kicked her hand away, shouting angrily, "Unless my father-in-law and son come back, there will be no possibility between us.
Get out! I will never forgive you." Without looking at her again, I turned around and left without looking back. After that day, I moved out of my old home. Sophia was reluctant to sign the divorce agreement. She was probably still dreaming that we could go back to the past. It was ridiculous. I hired a lawyer and prepared to sue. Before I filed the complaint, I received the news of Sophia's death.
It was a car accident, and the perpetrator was David's father. Later, I learned from the police record that after returning home from the police station that day, Sophia immediately took back all the things she had given to David, including the mansion, sports car, and expensive watch. David's father, a man who was used to a life of luxury, how could he bear such a blow? He watched his son go to jail, and his life of luxury turned into begging on the street. The huge gap made him completely collapse. David was eventually sentenced to death for premeditated murder. When I heard the news, I felt nothing in my heart. Their ending was no longer a big deal to me. The divorce procedures have not been completed yet, and I inherited all the inheritance under Sophia's name. It was Qingming Festival again. I brought flowers and fruits to the graves of my father-in-law and son.
"Dad, Mark, I'm here to see you."
I seemed to see my father-in-law and Mark standing together, smiling at me.
"James, Dad. We are leaving now, you must live well."